Yezid Sayigh is a senior fellow at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center and author of Armed Struggle and the Search for State. You're joining us from London today, sir. Thank you for your time. There are plenty of people around the world who support Palestinian self-determination, but also cannot get behind attacks like October the 7th. How do you even begin to engage with these two ideas?
Well, for me, one of the very first thoughts I had, and that I tried to communicate to people like my own kids, was that it was entirely possible and right to be both opposed to what Hamas did on the 7th of October in terms of the deliberate slaughter of civilians, non-combatants in southern Israel, and at the same time demand freedom for Palestinians. I think it was a huge mistake that many fell into, that they had to somehow turn a blind eye to what Hamas had done. And I think that was fundamentally unnecessary and, of course, unethical. It was entirely possible, indeed necessary, to reconcile the two positions. They're both correct to be opposed to what Hamas did, but at the same time to be opposed to what Israel has done since then and had done for many years before to Palestinians, to Lebanese, and to others.
What is the track record of armed resistance in achieving self-determination? I mean, does it usually work?
That's a really broad question. Since the end of World War II and the era of decolonization, it's been clear that many armed struggles around what was then known as the Third World, the Global South, were instrumental in bringing about the end of colonial rule. This could even be said of India, for example, where we sort of exalt the position of Gandhi and nonviolence, but overlook the fact that crucial to the ultimate success of Gandhi's campaign was the fact that the British faced armed movements in India as well. So, often the armed resistance movements don't achieve military victories, but they eat away at the political will of the colonizing force, for instance, the United States and Indochina, and ultimately bring about a withdrawal. In the case of Israel and Palestine, things are different because comparing, for instance, to French occupation of Algeria, which lasted for a very long time, from 1830 until 1962, that's 132 years, the French colonialists ultimately did have a mother country they could retreat to, whereas when it comes to Israel, the idea that Jewish Israelis would just go back to where they came from, I think is no longer either, politically correct or ethically correct. And it does mean that Palestinians, I think, have always faced this dilemma of being clear that they had the right to resist occupation and dispossession and exile. But at the same time, I think they've never quite worked out how to address the Jewish Israeli population with ideas, political visions that both sides could buy into. It wasn't enough to say, we're offering you democracy or a secular state or a united state with equality for all citizens. That all sounds wonderful and I think comes from a good place. But if the other side doesn't accept that and become a partner in that, then how are you going to impose it? And you can't basically impose it. So I think these have been fundamental dilemmas facing the Palestinians from day one and still do.
Now, Israel says that it's going to defeat Hamas. Do you think that's even possible?
I think the real question here is Israel seeks to defeat the desire of people who define themselves as Palestinian, who live under Israeli control, with a direct military control in the West Bank, mixed control in East Jerusalem, indirect but also direct now military control in Gaza, and second-class citizenship inside Israel itself. The idea that these people will accept and become willing subjects in perpetuity to disenfranchisement, basic political rights, basic civil rights denied to them, this idea is ludicrous. And so it's not about whether Israel can destroy Hamas or not. It might do. But what does it do about 7 million Palestinians whose lives it controls in every possible way every day?
What does international law say about the right to resistance, and specifically when it comes to the Palestinians?
I'm not a legal expert. I can't quote, book and verse on this, but
well, do they have the right to resist is the question.
Well, the right to resist is absolute, I think, for everyone. The right to armed resistance is also something that I believe is enshrined in international law. But nonetheless, resistance should also observe and be bound by international humanitarian law and the laws of war, which means you don't kill unarmed prisoners, for instance, even soldiers. You don't kill civilians and so on. You don't use torture. You don't use starvation. All the sorts of things that Israel has been able to use for the last year. But Palestinians, and I think this is crucial and was on the 7th of October last year, that Palestinians too were bound and had to recognize that they were bound by the same laws that they seek to be applied in the case of Israeli action. And I think this goes back, but there's obviously a lot of political manipulation here and propaganda on both sides. I think back when I think of 7th of October, I'm reminded of Israeli Defense Minister Ariel Sharon in 1982, who later became prime minister, one of the most hawkish right-wing politicians Israel's ever had. And in 1982, when he justified the Israeli invasion of Lebanon to destroy the PLO and destroy the roots of Palestinian nationalism, all of which failed, of course, his justification was that in the previous 13 years, the PLO had killed just over 1,200 Israelis and other nationals, of whom some 2/3 were military. So in terms of the normal way we think about things, it's clear that even according to Sharon, the PLO had actually targeted the military far more than it had targeted civilians. But here we have a situation where with Hamas on 7th of October, it reversed that almost exactly to something like 800 civilian dead and nearly 400 military dead on the Israeli side. But again, everyone is weaponizing these notions of international law, what it allows and doesn't. I fear we're now in a moment, we're witnessing the beginning of an era where the entire edifice of international law, laws of war set up over the past more than a century, I think that is fundamentally eroded. And I think that the lure of using artificial intelligence in war and what it allows is going to overwhelm the idea that the old laws still apply or can apply. And I think we're entering into a very dangerous new era on the legal front and not just on the military and humanitarian front.
Yezid Sayigh, author of Armed Struggle and the Search for State. Thank you very much.